Okay, I am reading out of First Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are saved is the power of God. Father, we thank you, not just for the salvation and for all that it cost, but we thank you, Father, for the power of you yourself through your Spirit that dwells in us, that enables us to overcome um, our temptations and our desires, that we might choose to live for you. So we pray now, Father, that you would help us to focus on you for this time, that you'd help us to get to know you, and that you would give us the power of your Spirit to do these things. And it's in Jesus' name we ask these things. Amen. All right, well, last time we looked at Luke chapter 6, and we looked at verses 12 through 16, if you remember. That's when Jesus, it appears, actually finally picked 12 inner core disciples. And it's not completely clear, but it appears that that's the way it happened, that he called the disciples to follow him earlier on and then called them to be his inner 12 disciples much later in the ministry. Well, today we're in chapter 7 of Luke, and we're going to try to go through the first, I think it's 18 verses, all of it today, and then we'll move back into Matthew next time. But let's start in chapter 7 of Luke, and let's read verses 1 through 10, okay?
Hold on, my fingers. I'm like my one hand doesn't work very good. I think I got that arthritis. Right? You said 7 what?
Verse 1, 1 through 10.
Oh, you want me to read 1 through 10?
Yeah.
All right. When Jesus had finished saying all this in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion servant who his master valued highly was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking to come heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he's built our synagogue. So Jesus went with them. He was not from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed.
Okay. You want to go through 10?
Oh, I'm sorry. Uh, for I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one I say, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following, he said, I tell you, I have not found such a great faith even in Israel. Then the man who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well.
Now, a lot of times, and we're going to go, hopefully, like I said, through the next one too, people will think that these are just two unconnected, isolated things. But I think we'll see that they really are connected. And they're connected both in their story as well as timing. Now, when it says in verse 1 of chapter 7 that when he completed all his discourse, he went into Capernaum. If you go back a few pages in Matthew, what you'll in Luke, what you'll find is this is essentially Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, and of course it's unclear whether it's the same event that Matthew describes in his Sermon on the Mount sequences starting in chapter 5. There's an awful lot of similarities. Although Luke doesn't go anywhere near the detail. But Luke also has enough slight differences that it may be that it's two different things. But regardless, whether it's one or two different events, what we see here is Jesus is given a very lengthy and detailed discourse on the kingdom. Okay, and so once he's done with that, he comes down to Capernaum, and there's probably a large number of people following him, although we don't really know this for certain. Um, but it's likely that that's what's going on. Um, and it says that it's after this teaching that Luke is going to capture the events that are about to happen. Okay, and so he's going back to Capernaum. That's up in Galilee on the Sea of Galilee. And in verse 2, a centurion slave who was highly regarded by him was sick and about to die. Now, it's not the easiest and cleanest thing to hear, in English, but the idea here is it's the slave of the centurion who's dying. Okay, right? And the centurion highly regards him. Okay, and that the slave is pretty close to death. Okay, now the term here used for slave is doulos or bondservant. It strictly in its most literal interpretation means one who's a slave, but who chooses to do this. Okay, it's not unconditional. That's probably not the situation, but it does probably imply that it's a good relationship. Okay. And we have this really unique situation that's developing here, because in verse 3 it goes on to say, and when he heard about Jesus, that is the centurion, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. And what's interesting, of course, about this is that a Roman centurion is requesting healing from a Jewish rabbi who's claiming to be the Messiah, which, by the way, has implications that are not favorable to the Romans, because the Messiah was going to rule from King David's throne. He was going to overthrow the Romans, right? So the Romans would have some degree of suspicion about anybody claiming to be Messiah. Okay, no differently than Herod the Great. Okay, and that this guy is supposedly the long-awaited anointed one from God. Okay, now what's interesting, if you think about it, is that the centurion, we see here that the centurion, highly regards him, or clearly cares quite a bit. The slave is dear to the centurion. Okay. And so he's not only requesting healing, but if you think about this from a biblical point of view, what he's really doing is he's entering into intercessory prayer. He's sending people on his behalf to Jesus, to God, to ask God to heal somebody else, because that's his desire, that he would love this, that if he would do this. Now don't miss that part. This is without a doubt intercessory prayer, and that what's really going on is the centurion's love, and I don't necessarily mean that in any other way other than a fellowship love for his neighbor is unmistakable, and it's very unexpected for a Roman soldier. Now, I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but the soldiers were the arm, the military arm, the police arm of the Roman, empire. Now, when it says,
nationality do you think his slave was?
We're not told.
Okay, so he could have been from Africa or Ethiopia.
Yeah. Yep. In fact, there's a reasonable chance of this. Okay. And when we're told that he was highly regarded, the slave was highly regarded. Okay. That word means to be prized or precious or to be held in honor. Okay. Now, when I talk about this, it's going to be helpful to think about it a little bit from a biblical perspective, from God's perspective. Okay? And so I start us off by saying it's in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, where Jesus recites what's called the royal law. Okay? And when asked to summarize the commandments, all the commandments, Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and that you should love your brother as yourself." Okay? And so here's this centurion asking for prayers, not for himself, okay, but for a slave. And as you hinted to a minute ago, we don't even know that the slave is Jewish. I guess it would make a little more, likelihood that if your slave is Jewish, you'd reach out to a Jewish rabbi, okay? But he's a Roman soldier, he's a Roman centurion, and we don't know where he got this slave. It may very well be that the slave is not Jewish, okay? Now, slaves in those days in Rome were quite common, okay? And I remember reading somewhere, I couldn't find the reference, but that perhaps as many as half the population of the Empire of Rome were slaves. Now, whether that's right or not isn't important. What's important is they were a significant proportion of the population of the Roman Empire. And under Roman law, slaves had no rights because they weren't citizens. If you were a citizen of Rome, you couldn't be a slave. You had to be a free man, okay? And so they had no rights, no laws covered them, okay? The centurion, in the meantime, and we sometimes get a little confused about what a centurion is. He's a professional soldier. He's an officer in the Roman army who commands at least 100 soldiers. Now, sometimes it was more than that. It could have been hundreds of soldiers, but it was at least 100, okay? And a centurion, to get promoted to that level, had to have shown great valor, character, prowess in battle, and he had to do, and the expectation was, this isn't some officer that, stands on the hill and watches the battle. The centurion goes into battle with his 100 men, right there with them, fights with them, and directs their moves at the same time. Okay? The Roman army demanded that their centurions conduct themselves to very high standards. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense, because they are the ones enforcing the strategy, the rules, the discipline in the battlefield. They're the ones actually executing the battle. Okay? Now, it's well known that some of the senior centurions who had repeatedly displayed courage and had had quite a bit of success on the battlefield often commanded great respect and had really high prestige within the Roman society, and they were very well paid. Okay, they had very high levels of authority. Like I say, they were respected, and they were very influential in the society. That's who this guy is. Okay.
So, do you think he believes Jesus is the Messiah, or?
Well, we're going to see. Okay. Now, just as a side note, one of those interesting little side notes, there's really only 3 centurions who are mentioned with any real detail in the New Testament. And every one of them is discussed in a very positive light. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay. So in verse 3, he's got this sick slave who he cares about quite a bit, which is unusual in its own right. Okay, and in verse 3, he hears about Jesus, and he sent Jewish elders to ask him to come and save the life of the slave. So the centurion sends Jewish elders. Now Matthew describes the same situation, but he says the centurion went, and there's a little bit of discussion and commentators and scholars about why Luke says it one way, Matthew says it another. I'm not going to get into it. For the purposes of today, we're just going to say the centurion sent Jewish elders. Okay? Notice he didn't send any of his other slaves. He sent Jewish elders. Okay? Now that tells us a couple of things. The centurion not only has contact with these Jewish elders, okay, which is unusual right there and then, just by that alone, okay, but it means that the elders must have had some degree of respect for the centurion to even to go to Jesus on his behalf. Okay, so this situation is actually pretty unusual when you start to think about it. Okay, now also remember that the Jews of today thought it would make them unclean to have intimate interactions with pagans, okay, to be in their homes and stuff like that, and that they would become ceremonially unclean. Now the Romans instead, heck, they looked down on everybody. They were the conquerors. They were the rulers of the day. They were the most impressive and strongest army. They had this great, government at one point, although now it was a dictatorship. It had been this marvelous republic. They had succeeded the Greek Empire and had taken a lot of their culture with them. So they had a pretty haughty attitude themselves. Okay, and so you would have expected the centurion with this kind of standing, with this kind of authority, okay, to not necessarily be very considerate of his slaves. Doesn't mean he would necessarily mistreat them, although he might. Okay, you wouldn't think that he would be involved in intercessory prayer or concerned about their healing. Nor would you expect him, like I say, to go talk to the Jews and send Jewish elders to get a Jewish rabbi. Okay, now that might imply that the slave was Jewish, but like I said earlier, we just don't know. Now, as far as the Jews go, it wasn't against God's law for them to be in a Gentile's home. It was against their custom. Okay, that's also important. Now, the elders are probably the elders of the nearby synagogue. Okay, and when it says that when the centurion heard about Jesus, it is when he was made aware of something. He was to hear it and be made aware of it. Okay, he was to consider something or understand it or perceive it. In other words, the centurion understood that Jesus had this reputation for running around the countryside, doing miraculous things and healing all kinds of people. Okay. Now it's interesting again that this centurion then reaches out to have Jesus come heal his slave. Okay? And as a man of authority and as the conqueror, as I said, don't miss the fact that what he's doing now is he's reaching out to one of the people groups that they've conquered. One of the people groups that's below them. He's reaching out to them for help. Okay? I mean, that's really, truly impressive. Okay? I mean, even today, certain people who consider themselves superior or to have arrived or something like that, sometimes they're hesitant even to ask for help. Okay? Particularly if they have to ask for help from those that they consider to be below them. But that's exactly, if you listen to the society at the time, that's exactly what the centurion is doing. It certainly doesn't appear to be the way he feels or thinks, but that is what society would say he was doing. And that's the point here, that the centurion, despite being the conquering Roman, man of authority, one with highly respected and in charge, okay, he doesn't seem to feel that the Jews were below him in standing or that his slave. And he even looks to the religious leaders not as he's their superior, but he's looking to them for help. Now, this just wasn't common. Okay. So in verse 4, we continue with the story. And they came to Jesus and they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him." Now, notice what the Jewish elders did. At first they implored Jesus. They approached Jesus, they implore him, not with a simple request, but with haste and urgency. They implored him for help. And then they say the centurion is worthy. Now, this is actually a remarkable and huge statement coming from Jewish elders concerning a Roman oppressor, that they would describe him as worthy.
Treated them.
What's that?
He must have treated them fairly.
I would assume so. And that's again the point, right? This is unusual.
The slave is worthy.
What's that?
They don't say the slave is worthy.
Well, true, okay. Now, by the way, worthy was not a description that was bandied about very often, particularly from a strict Jewish interpretation of the scriptures. Okay, so I'll leave that for a second. We'll come back to it. Okay, notice they say he is worthy for you to grant this to him. Verse 5, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built, that's my translation, our synagogue. Okay, so now we get a little bit of idea of why they say it was worthy. He loves the people of Israel, according to these elders, and their nation in addition, and he either built or rebuilt or repaired their synagogue. The word in the Greek is okodomeo, and it can mean either to build or to restore. So maybe he built it, maybe he restored it, we don't know. Okay, and while the Romans allowed the Jews to practice Judaism, they were certainly not going to use tax money that was earmarked to go to Caesar to fix or to build a Jewish synagogue. This was a Jewish synagogue. You got a problem with your synagogue? You figure it out, you fix it yourselves. Most people believe this centurion paid for it out of his personal funds. Okay? So that starts to give us a little bit even more of an insight. Okay? And to put this into perspective, just think about this for a minute. Many Christians today are unwilling to pay, or at least are reluctant to pay for improvements to their own churches. Here's a Roman centurion out of his own funds apparently paying to repair or to build a Jewish synagogue. Now in verse 6 we read, and so Jesus started on his way with them. And when he's not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, notice it's friends this time, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. Well, that's an interesting statement, isn't it, when we think about it? Jesus, first of all, decides to go. Remember what I told you. If the Jews went into a Gentile's home, they considered that would make them ceremonially unclean. Doesn't bother Jesus. He's going to go.
Probably one of their stupid, Pharisees made up law.
Well, that's what I said. It's not the law of God. It's their custom. Okay? All right? So it's not like he was going to break the law. But imagine Jesus, like I said, is just given this Sermon on the Mount, or some people call it the Sermon on the Plain when it's in Luke, because he describes it as being a plain, a flat area. But he's just given this big sermon. The disciples are with him. Imagine what they thought when Jesus said, oh yeah, sure, I'll go to his home and heal the servant. I mean, it had to kind of shock them. Now, on top of that, as he approaches, then more messengers come, and this time the centurion appears to send friends. Okay. Now, it's also interesting to notice that the Jewish elders describe the centurion as how? Worthy.
Worthy and respected.
Yeah, worthy. But the centurion's own self description is he's unworthy. Now that tells you a lot right there. He didn't feel he was worthy to have Jesus in his home. Okay? Now it's really, it takes a little bit of thinking here to get into some of this. Okay? This is a really incredible statement of humility. That's what this centurion has been displaying. He's the conqueror. He's a man of authority. He has power. He has standing. He has wealth. And yet, he's saying to this itinerant rabbi, Jewish rabbi, I'm not worthy for you to come into my home. I think there's also a distinct chance here that he was concerned that by asking Jesus to come to the home and heal his servant, that he would be requesting Jesus to become ceremonially unclean. Think about the degree of respect now he's also starting to show to Jesus. I think for a minute, although it's pure speculation, okay, we have to ask the question, why would Jesus go? Okay, and because it's speculation, we can't know for certain. But sometimes asking these questions are good for opening our minds. Now, first of all, Jesus may have gone because the Spirit led him to go. But what else do we know about this situation? When the elders said he's worthy, Jesus didn't say worthy in what way. All the elders have told him is that the servant is sick and that he helped rebuild or repair or whatever their synagogue. So what we see in that is what I alluded to earlier, the centurion's love for his fellow man, both for the servant and for the Jews. On top of that, I want you to think about this for a second. The centurion was willing to reach out across social and political standards of his day on behalf of those of a lesser class, those are my words, okay, just because of his concern for them. Now, just as I said a minute ago, imagine what the crowds thought when Jesus said, yeah, I'll go to this Roman centurion's home. Imagine what the impact that would have potentially been to the centurion standing around amongst his Roman colleagues if they found out he was calling a Jewish rabbi to come heal his servant. This guy's taking a risk. He's not worried about his standing or his own self-respect. Verse 7, we continue on. After the centurion tells him, look, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Again, another really remarkable statement. Okay, this centurion has to be a pretty special guy as we dig into it and think about it. Okay, particularly given what we know about centurions.
He also must be following and know what Jesus has done and what he stands for and what he said.
Yeah, remember when it said when he heard about Jesus, that word means to perceive, to understand. When he understood that Jesus was this miracle man, and I think it's heavy with implications. Like maybe he understood more than just that he was a miracle man. Okay. Now, what he's saying here is, you don't even have to just say the word and this guy will be healed. What the centurion is saying is essentially, hey, we both are men of authority. I have authority. He's going to explain it in a second, but you can see it's already starting. I've got authority over soldiers And when I order them to do stuff, they don't question it, they just go. And he says, all you have to do is say the word, the implication being you have authority over what?
Life.
Maybe not exactly life, but certainly healing, nature, right? It's a pretty interesting statement. I also think that it's worth taking a minute to contrast the centurion's feelings of unworthiness with the attitude of the Jewish religious leaders who we've been seeing as we've been going through this study on Jesus' ministry. Okay? Or even most of the followers, as we've discussed, following Jesus, who are probably more interested in seeing the miracles and seeing what Jesus does next, rather than believing he's actually Messiah. Now, in terms of the centurion and the religious leaders, both are people of authority. As I said, the centurion has authority over the army. The religious leaders have quite a bit of authority over Jewish people, over Jewish society, over Jewish life, because they have authority within the religion. Yet, what we can see is the religious leaders appear to believe their authority is greater than Jesus's, while the Roman centurion would appear to be saying Jesus's authority is greater than his. Again, think of that contrast and think of the humility in this guy. Now in verse 8, he goes on, as I said, to clarify. He says, "For I also am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and whatever, do, and I to my slave, do this, and he does it." So what he's really saying is very clear. What he's clearly implying that he knows that Jesus has authority over the physical world, the spiritual world perhaps, but certainly the ability to command healing, and healing from a distance. Verse 9. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him and turned and said to the crowd that was following him. See, here we know there's a crowd. "I say to you, not even in Israel I found such great faith." Also, another incredible statement. The Jews had come to the point long before Jesus' day where they believed they were the chosen people, as in preferentially chosen. They were better than everybody else. That's why God had chosen them. This is one of the things that they're being conquered and ruled over by empire after empire made it so difficult. Hey, if we're the chosen people, why don't you send us another King David? Where's the Messiah? Why can't we, get back to being, they struggled with that thing. Okay? And so Jesus is making this statement that it's a Gentile, a centurion in the oppressing army, who has such great faith that he's never even seen this anywhere in Israel. Imagine what the crowd thought about that statement. I don't think it's an accident that Luke says, and he turned and said to the crowd. He wants you to know that the crowd heard Jesus say this. What does that mean? Jesus is saying that faith can be outside of the Jewish world, outside of the Jewish society. Jesus is openly declaring this man's faith was greater than any in Israel. And if we stop from thinking about it from a shock point of view about what the Jews that following him are thinking when they hear this, okay, not another Jew, it's not John the Baptist, not Nicodemus, not a religious leader, but this Roman centurion has greater faith. Think about what it says about the level of faith of the Jews in Israel at that day. Now, I don't mean of each and every individual Jew, but the overall state of faith. I think it also tells us that the faith in Israel isn't all that great. And that they don't have the greatest view of Jesus at this time. Okay, and that's consistent with much of what we've been saying through these studies. Okay, now I think it's also fair game at this point as we read about this, and we won't dwell on it, but just to ask the question, do I have as much faith as this centurion? Jesus' statement concerning the faith of the centurion, the healing of the servant, the honoring of the centurion's request, all foreshadow Jesus' acceptance of Gentiles by faith into his kingdom. Also, here's another thing to think about. Maybe you'll remember this when we were studying Genesis. In chapter 12, that's when God calls Abraham out of the land of the Chaldees to come to the land of Canaan. And if you remember chapter 12, verse 3, he makes Abram at that time a promise. He makes him a series of them, but one of them in verse 3 of chapter 12 of Genesis is this: I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In a sense, Jesus is partially fulfilling that promise. This guy has been a blessing to the Jewish nation. I'm going to bless him. Now, lastly, well, not lastly, but another thought before we start to move on. Don't mistake the fact that Luke has just documented that Jesus gave this massive teaching of the kingdom, very similar to the Sermon on the Mount. And who's demonstrating faith right after that? A Gentile. Again, that should tell us something, okay? Don't forget the fact also that at this point in time, as we said, this is roughly, end of the second year, early third year of Jesus' ministry, that the leaders of the Jewish religion are already in full opposition to Jesus and his message. And yet this guy believes that Jesus can heal his servant while the religious leaders have rejected Jesus. The centurion...
to go if they don't believe who Jesus says he is.
What's that?
I'm a little lost as to, I understand, the centurion has faith and he's heard and all this kind of stuff, but when he asks the Jewish leaders to go and the Jewish leaders don't believe who Jesus is, are they going just because of their respect for
for the man, for the centurion.
Because they probably don't think. I mean, they probably don't. I'm just surprised.
No, apparently so, because Luke doesn't say anything that these elders also knew of Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a case of the centurion heard about Jesus and he asked them to go on his behalf.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a point here about Jesus' ministry that I think Luke is making. It's so convincing that a pagan centurion believes, okay, while the religious leaders have shut their minds to the truth. I mean, this has to be obviously convincing. Why wouldn't the religious leaders get it? See, the centurion knew enough about Jesus to believe that he could and would heal the servant. The centurion knew of Jesus and possibly had been following the stories of Jesus, or once he heard about the stories of Jesus, then he said, well, hey, let's go get him to come, heal our sick servant. Or maybe he'd been following the stories all along and then the servant gets sick. It's not entirely clear. But regardless, he had faith that Jesus could heal him. And this is truly an interesting situation, okay? Now, after this, Jesus says, I haven't found any such great faith. And when those who've been sent, that is verse 10, when those who've been sent to and returned to the house, that is the house of the centurion, they found the slave to be in good health. That's Luke's just little summary statement saying, see, and he really did it. Now the next verses we'll go through 11 through 17 fairly quickly. And there's a lot more similarities here to the story of the centurion than maybe we really would like to think about it first. And I want to draw, when we're done, I want to draw two thoughts, one from the story about the centurion, one from the story of the widow, together, and we'll see something very similar here, okay, and something interesting. Maya, why don't you read 11 through 17?
Okay. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the coffin, and those carrying it stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country.
Now, in the first story that we read about with the centurion, Jesus demonstrated his authority over nature, if you will. Jesus now is going to further demonstrate his authority, not just over nature, but over life itself. Okay? And before we go on, I want you to remember that when we were in John chapter 5, which is when Jesus apparently was in Jerusalem right before this trip up to Galilee in the Capernaum area, Jesus told the religious leaders in John chapter 5, verse 21. Remember when he was having that argument with them after he healed the lame man, and there was a bunch of back and forth and everything else? Jesus told them, "For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will." Now, if I got this timing right, Jesus tells them in Jerusalem at the time of the feast, if you remember, and in the heat of the argument, that the Father has given him all authority, even to raise the dead. And now he's going to go up to Galilee and do it. Why doesn't he do it in Jerusalem? Because they have no faith. Okay? He's going to go up to Galilee, okay? And I just want you to be thinking about that.
Before he raises Lazarus from the dead?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well before. So verse 11, notice how Luke starts, soon afterwards. So this fairly quickly, I mean, I don't know, a couple of days, a week, something. Soon afterwards, Jesus is down at the city called Nain. Okay? Now, it's a small town, and it's a little southeast of Nazareth. Okay? It's known today. It's spelled differently, but it's basically the same place. Most people believe. Okay? So he's down there. His disciples are with him, and he's also accompanied by, again, a large crowd. Okay? Verse 12, and as he approached the gate of the city, okay, a dead man was being carried out on a stretcher, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a sizable crowd from the city was with her. Okay, now, so you get these two large crowds coming together. Now, from a biblical point of view, looking at Jesus' ministry, what that should tell us is lots of witnesses. Okay? Lots of witnesses. The woman was a widow. Okay? And what that means is, notice what it says is the dead man being carried out was the only son of this woman, and she's a widow. There's no males left in her family to provide for her. In that day and age, women didn't go out and get jobs. She was in a dire situation. In fact, some people would have written and said that basically her only option is either marriage or prostitution or to die. She's destitute. Her future is very grim. Okay? And it's important to notice that that's what Luke is telling us, that this woman has no options left. Her only son is dead and she's a widower. And here they are taking this, her dead son out in a funeral kind of a procession. He's on a stretcher. They're carrying him. He's wrapped, probably to some extent. They're going to take him and put him into a grave of some type. And there are probably a large number of followers simply because she's in such a bad straits. I mean, for all they know, they're not going to see her again. Verse 13, and when the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her, is what my translation says. And he said to her, do not weep. Now, compassion, I don't think we've seen it before in our study, but this is a word that's used all throughout the Gospels to describe Jesus. And it's really worthy of paying a little bit of attention to. The Greek word is a kind of a weird word. It's a combination of different words. It's splegnedsomai. It means to be moved to the pit of one's very soul, to the seat of love for another. Okay, it has to do with one's guts and things like that, but that's because that's where they thought feelings were at this time. But it's to be moved to your very bowels of your soul, so to speak. Okay? Like I say, it's frequently used to describe Jesus in the Gospels. There's one other interesting place where it's used. It's used to describe the Father in the story of the prodigal son. Okay? Also, notice in verse 13, that Luke refers to Jesus as Lord. When the Lord saw her. Now this, I think, is Luke giving us a little bit of a hint about what's going to happen. The Greek word that he uses is kurios, okay, which means master or Lord. In a very general sense, it means the possessor of all things. Now it can be typically used in a local kind of way, a strict way, as in the Lord or the master of the house or of the town or the village or whatever the heck it happens to be. Okay, but in the way that it's written here, in the way that it's used, it's roughly equivalent to the Hebrew word Adonai, and it implies divinity. Okay, so I think Luke is giving us a hint. Because, of course, Luke is writing this afterwards. Verse 14, and when he, that's Jesus, came up and touched the coffin, and the bearers, by the way, sorry, I wanted to say one more thing about verse 13. What does Jesus say to the widow? Don't weep. That's kind of a, I guess today people would say, cruel thing to say to somebody who's grieving. Hey, don't weep. But coming from Jesus, it's perfectly appropriate, as we're going to see. So in verse 14, he comes up and he touches the coffin, that is the stretcher, and the bearers come to a halt. Now they could have come to a halt for a couple of different reasons. One, if he touched the stretcher, it could very well be that he touched it enough that he's in their way, and so they stopped just so they don't run him over. By the way, the widow or the mother would have been near the front. She would have been probably very close to Jesus when he says, don't weep. Okay? But it's very possible that the other reason that they stopped is because touching a dead person was a big no-no in Jewish society. But this time it wasn't custom, it was the law. Okay, it's in Numbers chapter 5, verse 2. You can find it there, but it's in other places. And it would have made somebody ceremonially unclean. But again, it's not going to matter in this particular case. Somebody said once, or at least a couple of times, that Jesus never went to a funeral that he didn't interrupt. Now, as we start to connect these two events, the centurion and this widow with her dead son, notice it's interesting that the centurion declared that Jesus had only to command things and they would be done. Okay, and here we're going to see Luke give us an extreme example of exactly what that means. And I don't think it's an accident. As I said, Luke has just described this version of the Sermon on the Mount. He shows this Gentile his faith, and Jesus can, and there's crowds following him. Jesus is proving what he's just told them. I am the king of the kingdom. And now he's going to take it another step. He's going to say, oh, let me show you, I am also king over life. I declare, okay, life and death. Okay? So Luke is now doing this, and it's, I don't believe, an accident that Jesus does this right away. Okay, verse 15. Oh, excuse me, finishing up verse 14. And Jesus said to the young man, I say to you, arise. Now again, this should be pretty odd. God speaks, and here Jesus speaks to the dead as if they were alive. There's a famous pastor, he's now retired, who, when he used to teach classes, he would bring the seminary students out to a graveyard at one point during their studies, and he would command them and tell them, okay, I want you to preach to all the graves and have them come out of their graves. And of course, never once happened. And his point was, you can't do it, I can't do it. Only God can do this. In Romans chapter 4, verse 17, it was Paul who wrote, when speaking to the Romans about Abraham, as it is written, I have made you, he's quoting God here as part of God's comments to Abraham. I have made you the father of many nations. And of course, Paul was referring to before the birth of any children. In the presence of God, whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. See, Jesus is just doing what God had done all along. God told Abraham all the way back in Genesis, you're going to have multiple children when he was 75 and 80 years old. And his wife was 10 years younger, but she was also pretty old. You're going to have, he was calling into existence those that don't exist. And here's Jesus calling to life those who are dead. So he says to the young man, arise. And in verse 15, the dead man sat up and began to speak. The inference is it happened immediately. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Now, maybe I'm making too much of this, but I find it very interesting. Why would Jesus give him back to his mother? Wasn't his mother his mother?
Because God gave the son to his mother in the first place.
So why is he giving him back?
Because he's in charge.
Why is he giving him back?
Because she needs him.
The inference, I think, is that Jesus raised this man to life. He's now Jesus's. And instead of saying essentially, follow me or come be what he's saying, go back to your mother and take care of her. He returns the young man to his mother. Okay, now I think it's for more than just to provide for her. I think it's for compassion reasons. I think it's because the mother loves her. I think it's because the mother is this widow. She has nothing left. But the point is, Jesus raised him from the dead. But Jesus says, you're not obligated to me. I give you back to your mother. Take care of her. Isn't it interesting when you think about it? What's one of the things Jesus said from the cross? He said to the Apostle John, take care of Mary. She's now your mother. And Mary, what's that?
He told him to take care of his mother.
Yeah, that's right. And see, here's Jesus saying, take care of your mother. Verse 16.
Jesus likes mommies.
Yep. Fear gripped them all. And years ago, I remember reading this, thinking to myself, I'll bet it did. Okay. And they began glorifying God. Now listen to this, pay attention. Saying, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. Well, it's great that they have a reverent fear of what Jesus can do, bringing back to life this dead kid. And of course, you know, everybody in that village knows he's dead. They know the whole story. They're not going to go back and say, well, maybe he was really asleep. They're carrying him off to bury him. Probably multiple people have looked at him and said, hey, he's dead. Okay? So there's no doubt about the fact that Jesus has raised him. But this word visited, episkotomai, it means to look upon or to inspect, to see how one is. Now, from a Hebrew perspective, this word would be meant to imply that God has looked in upon his people in order to help them. Okay? But what else did they say? They said a great prophet has arisen amongst us. God has visited his people.
They don't think he's the Messiah. They think he's a prophet.
Yeah. And one of the reasons they would think this, by the way, this would come out of the Old Testament. It's actually kind of a reasonable conclusion. Is two of their greatest prophets, one often considered the greatest prophet ever, was Elijah. And his successor, Elisha, both of them each raised a child from the dead. So we realize that what these people are saying is Jesus is the next Elijah. And God has been good to his people by visiting them through his prophet Jesus to raise this young man from the dead. They're not acknowledging Jesus as God. Otherwise, they would not have referred to him as prophet. Now, as it ends, after all of this, and they are celebrating God, that's good, but they've got a completely wrong impression of who Jesus really is. And again, I think this helps us understand and have some insight to what's going on during Jesus' ministry. Here he does this incredible miracle, and maybe it would be reasonable, given their Old Testament history and their scriptures documenting Elijah and Elisha's ministries, to say, oh, he's a prophet just like Elijah. God has visited his people. He's not only been gracious to this widow, raising her son through his prophet, but he has sent us, Israel that is, another prophet of Elijah's standing. That would be reasonable, except for one thing. Jesus was openly declaring he was Messiah and the Son of God. What are these people not hearing? Jesus is also, as he declares himself Son of God and Messiah, he's correcting the Pharisees' teachings. He's correcting their understanding of the laws and the scriptures. And he just got done giving this Sermon on the Mount that talks about what it means to be a member of the kingdom. You see, the people didn't like everything Jesus said. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
That was me. I hit my finger.
Yeah.
Mute it because the dog is barking and I hit hung up.
Okay. Well, my point here is the people don't necessarily hear or want to hear everything as Jesus is saying. The miracles are great. Prophet, that's okay. However, if you think about it, okay, it is interesting to ask the question, well, if the people recognized him as a prophet, why wouldn't the religious leaders at least acknowledge him as a prophet? I mean, maybe they don't buy into the Messiah and the Son of God thing. See, it was clear to the Roman centurion what's going on. And it's clear to the people that he's at least a prophet. The religious leaders chose not to hear, not to see, not to recognize. Okay? It's interesting. Notice how it says, verse 17, the report concerning him went out all over Judea and in all the surrounding districts. Now that's a pretty distinct area. The gospel writer Luke doesn't say it went, pretty far and wide or throughout the region, which is kind of indiscriminate. Judea is a pretty specific area. It includes Jerusalem. And notice he says, and the surrounding areas. Now, do you have any problems imagining that here's this rabbi who's been making all this big deal and he's been doing all these miracles and all these teachings and everything else, the same one who's been getting in arguments with the religious leaders, oh, and now he raised somebody from the dead? Do you have any doubt that this would spread wide and far?
They'd go crazy.
Yeah, of course. We would today too.
Raising somebody from the dead, I'd be like, holy crap.
Yeah. And yet, the people think of him as only a prophet, at best, a miracle worker, and the religious leaders can't give him the time of day. Why? Because Jesus threatened their way of life.
Yeah, as you said, they're afraid of him.
Yeah. And by the way, interestingly, you kind of alluded to it earlier, this is just the first of 4 people Jesus will resurrect. The 4th being himself. Okay, Jesus said, I've got the power to lay down my life and the power to pick it up.
This guy and who else?
There's going to be a daughter of a synagogue leader, and then there will be Lazarus. Okay? And this, the widow of Nain's son being raised from the dead, this early on, most people don't remember that Jesus did this multiple times in his ministry. He didn't just raise Lazarus. He raised 2 others. And here we see there's great witnesses to this event, and the word goes all throughout the land. So it's interesting to me that, one, we don't hear too much about this particular event. I get it. I mean, there's a lot going on in people's lives and in the world. But let's just see and notice and document and recognize that Jesus has done this multiple times. And here he is essentially upping the ante. He gives this sermon, this famous sermon on the plain, which is so similar to the Sermon on the Mount, or maybe it's the same one, describing what the kingdom's going to be like. Then shows he's the king by healing somebody from a distance, showing that, hey, Gentiles are also going to be a part of this. They receive the blessings, okay? And a Gentile man has great faith. And then he raises somebody from the dead. They're tuning this out. Now, while Luke may not have intended to do this, and maybe I'm making way too much out of 2 points, I want to pick one point out from the story of the centurion and one from the widow, okay? And I'm going to kind of put them together, okay? Notice that when Jesus heals the servant and that the elders come to the centurion, come to Jesus from the centurion on behalf of the centurion, they say that the centurion is worthy, okay? But Jesus never said he was worthy. You don't hear Jesus say that. In fact, he says nothing. Now, it's later in the book of Luke, chapter 18, verse 19, where Jesus says to somebody who came up to him and called him good teacher, Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except for God alone." Now, the idea in that verse, the word used for good is agathos, and it means excellent in any respect, distinguished, good, honorable, upright, from a biblically speaking point of view. Just like me, the centurion is not worthy. Okay? And this is both a New Testament and an Old Testament concept. For example, in Psalm 14, verse 1, we read that David wrote, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good." And in Romans chapter 3, verse 22 through 24, Paul wrote, "The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus." You see, the centurion was right. The religious elders, the synagogue elders, were wrong. He's not worthy. The only thing worthy about the centurion was his faith in Jesus. That's what Jesus commented upon. Not that he was worthy, but that he had great faith. Now, the second thing I want to point out is in verse 13. Okay? And Jesus saw her, that is the widow, and he felt compassion. Now, we commented on this word compassion a minute ago. And I want to connect worthy with compassion. And like I said, maybe Luke didn't intend this. After all, it's two different events. But I think it's okay. It's only the compassion of Jesus on our condition that leads us to have any blessings, to receive anything, or to have anything. You see, we're not worthy of his blessings. We're not worthy of his kindness, of his graciousness, of his love. Okay? But in his compassion, God visits us and blesses us with his grace and through his Son with salvation by faith alone, not through worthiness. And I think that that's something that's important to see here. Now, having finished up this, I want next time we'll go back and we'll start looking at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, okay?
Okay. Sorry, I was on mute. Oscar's going crazy because they have activity over there and they're leaving to go get food for back to school.
Okay.
My birthday.
Oh yeah, for the big celebration.
Hold on one second. Oscar.
All right, well, did you have any last questions or comments?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I really like this one. I had no idea about this slave centurion ever being raised from the dead.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah, I don't know when you just mentioned. That's why I asked who else. I have no clue that that he raises a synagogue's daughter.
Yeah, a synagogue leader's daughter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. No, never heard it. Or if I did, it just went right through. In one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
But
okay.
I can't believe something like that I wouldn't pay attention to.
Yeah, makes you wonder why they did. Now, the synagogue leader's daughter, that they keep real quiet.
Well, it also leads me to think, 3 and they're still not going to believe? What?
Yeah.
I mean, you got. But then the other thing is, though, too, okay, that was jumped to my mind, okay? At the end, when Satan is here,
when, he's going to bring peace and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he never raises anyone from the dead.
Well, yeah, he sort of does. Remember, the Antichrist gets wounded.
Does he what? And he makes.
Yeah.
And he.
Yeah, they'll say he was resurrected from the dead, and what Revelation says is that Satan indwells him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he'll imitate it. He'll try to imitate God and everything. Okay.
Got it. But then, okay, so that does make sense in my mind, because I'm thinking, okay, they don't believe Jesus. He does it 3 times, but they're going to believe Satan.
Yeah.
He does it once.
Yeah. Isn't that
Why?
interesting?
Why?
That interesting? And not only that, when he raises Lazarus, okay, it'll be right outside of Jerusalem, and it'll be.
Did he raise 3 because it has to do with the 3 days he was dead?
No, probably not.
Oh, okay.
And not only that, he's going to raise Lazarus right before Passover, which means there's all kinds of people there. So it's close proximity to Jerusalem. They're all going to know about this when he enters into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and they're still going to crucify him. Or maybe I should say, and all the more they're going to crucify him.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Wow. Talk about evil.
And what's sad is when you think about it, okay, going fast forward, to the Antichrist and people believing him and taking the mark, and he's going to raise, and all this kind of stupid stuff that he does. But we have this book. It's not happening right now. We have it right here telling us this is what's going to happen.
To be prepared. That's right.
And if you don't listen, you're up Schitt's Creek. So I maybe can sort of get it. Not. I mean, I understand the Jewish elders and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They're terrified because they don't want to be usurped. Okay. But to like a regular person, okay,
but
I can see how maybe they had to take time to try to, but why? But the Jews.
But this is why the story of the centurion is so important. The word of Jesus had spread so far and was so conclusive. A Gentile soldier believes. Why don't the religious leaders? Because they choose not to.
Well, why aren't they? I mean, was this prophesized by anybody that Jesus was going to do this, or raise Lazarus, from a prophet beforehand? Like, was it in any of their scriptures?
That God has the ability to do these things. I mean, they're just evidence that Jesus is telling the truth.
I just didn't know if they're totally ignoring that. Okay, the Old Testament, some prophet said, he's going to come and he's going to do.
Well, they're ignoring all kinds of prophecies, but not specifically with the resurrection of this kid.
Okay.
All right.
See, my little mind does think about these things, Eric.
Yep. Okay. Do you want to pray?
Okay. Dear God, thank you for being a part of my life. I don't know how to say it. I don't feel fortunate. I mean, yes, I am fortunate, but thank God I'm listening and I believe. And it's not just because I'm just so worried about my soul and where I go, but it's so comforting. It's so miraculous. It's so wonderful. It's just uplifting. And I wish others could hear this and see it and have hope that there's so much that you have given us, but yet so many turn away. Just thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing my family. Thank you for loving us. Amen.
Amen.